everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Wild Like a Flower Gardening. My name is Sarah, and in this video, I'm going to be talking to my friends and subscribers about some of the things to keep in mind as we plan and shop for our gardens this spring. Shh. She's sleeping. It's hard not to notice right now that our pollinators are struggling. It seems almost every other week there's another scientific publication or article being written on how bees and other pollinators are declining. There has not been very good news for the monarch butterfly lately, and there's definitely not much good news coming out for our honeybees and other native bee populations. So what can we do as gardeners to help? We can first of all have a passion for pollinators, and I think that's why you guys have been joining me to hear about them, right? You've got to have in your heart a little spot for them. Because how do we protect something if we don't really care about it? You know? How do we save something if we don't care about it? Every time I see that I get another view or another like or another subscriber, it gives me so much joy because it makes me feel that we will be able to have a positive impact on our pollinators starting this growing season. Now, even if you don't have much space to grow for pollinators, heck, if you're growing them in pots like I do, I want you to know that every little bit does count. In an area where I live at this apartment where it's nothing but concrete, my porch stood out and offered nectar and pollen and even milkweed for caterpillars to grow up on. And that was sitting on top of concrete. Imagine what you can do if you have an in-ground growing space, or if you have acreages to turn over for pollinator habitat or manage for wildlife in general. So no matter where you fit on the scale, I want you to know that I'm really thankful that you've been joining me to learn more about our pollinators because it makes a difference. So the way I've been trying to set up this channel is that here in the winter, while it's really snowy outside, I have put together quite a few longer sit-down presentations to give you some background information on butterflies, moths, their host plants. I did a video on native bees and a lot of the plants that specialist bees require. And I put this together so that way as we move through the growing season and I get to film outside, I get to do plant ID, I get to do garden tours, you will be able to reference back to those videos if you have questions that some of my summer videos don't answer. Now, I'll be doing my best as we go to always explain things, especially in terms that the regular gardener can understand. But if there's ever anything that you want more information on, you are more than welcome to let me know in the comments or reference back to some of my other sit-down videos. I'm thinking this will be one of my last sit-down indoor presentations for you for a little while because I'd like to be moving outside as much as possible. I think the next video I film will be on invasive species identification, so that way as they start to green up ahead of all the other plants, you can recognize if they're growing somewhere in your yard and you can get a jump on removing them. To kick off the list of how you should be planning for your garden, you want to first start with including host plants in your plant list. To determine what host plants you need to have a basic understanding of the common butterflies and moths in your area. You can figure this out by doing a quick Google search, or if you have any literature, take a look at what the ranges on some of the common butterflies are, and if they are native to your area, you want to know what their host plants are. A great example species is the monarch butterfly. Monarchs require milkweeds. So if you're not growing milkweed in your garden, you're not going to see monarch caterpillars. And there are also a few other species of butterflies and moths that will use milkweed as well, so you're not just attracting monarch butterflies. But essentially, you need to make sure you're including these host plants for the butterflies in your area, otherwise you're not going to be raising any caterpillars. You also need to plan out some of the plants that specialist bees require. Unlike butterflies and moths, specialist bees don't so much lay their eggs on, the plants that they require, but they require these plants to complete their life cycles all the same. I also included in my longer video on native bees, I talk about some examples of plants that are good for specialist bees. So you want host plants for butterflies and moths, and you want plants for your specialist bees, and bees in general. You also need to make sure that your garden is host to bloom times starting from April and going all the way through the fall and October. So as we know, pollinators peak in the summer months. And you want to make sure the bulk of your flowering plants are happening, for the peak. But we also have pollinators that come out in April. So if you were to get some spring ephemerals like spring beauties or wild geranium, you'd be able to provide pollen and nectar sources for those early emerging, pollinator species. You also need to make sure you're having species in your garden that bloom in August, September, and October, because we've got migrating monarchs that are going to need a food source as they travel down. Some of the varieties that I talk about in my native bee video that go into the fall are things like asters, common ironweed, even the goldenrods tend to bloom later in the season, providing a food source for our late season pollinators. So any of those species and other native plants that bloom into October, you want to make sure you have a few of those in your garden as well. Now, something else that I want to talk about that is a little controversial. So please bear with me and hear me out, because if anything you take away from my videos, I would like it to be this. Because this is something that if we're trying to have a positive impact, this is a negative impact happening at a faster rate than we could ever have a positive impact. And that is the use of pesticides in our garden. Now, chemical pesticides, whether you're intentionally targeting a specific pest, often harm a variety of other insects and pollinators in your garden. So if you're growing for pollinators and you're spraying pesticides, and specifically chemical pesticides, you're going to be harming the very pollinators you're trying to attract to your garden. So if you can avoid using chemical pesticides, please, that is so important. If that's the only thing you hear from me and that applies to you, please put the pesticides away. Look up alternatives that are a bit more natural. I knocked some aphids off some of my plants with soapy water. I know a lot of folks use neem oil. These are alternatives that are not going to decimate pollinator species in your garden. Now, even if you are a gardener who's committed to avoiding using pesticides, they can find their way into your garden all the same. So if you're purchasing plant starts from a nursery and it's not obvious that pesticides have not been used on those plant starts, odds are they've been treated already, and you're going to bring those pesticides into your garden. Now, if you're familiar with listening about pesticides, you may have heard what's called Neonectonoids. Now, those are a group of pesticides that are chemically similar to nicotine. So if you've ever puffed on a cigarette, nicotine isn't super great for us, and I can't imagine it being really great for pollinators either, right? So Neonectonoids, once used on a plant, they cause paralysis and death of insects that get that pesticide on them. If you've seen the videos, of a bee dying in someone's hand, that's largely due to the use of Neonectonoids. Now, these are pesticides that are used on a large scale with the agricultural industry. Now, if you're not growing for big ag, and even if you are, many farmers don't have much of a choice. A lot of farmers, these come pre-treated in the seeds, and the seed market is rather monopolized. So as a consumer, to avoid supporting agricultural use of neonectinoids, shop with your smaller, farmers. Shop local, go to the farmer's market. Get produce that hasn't been treated with pesticides, so that you're not supporting that. But let's loop it back into our gardens, right? So on a smaller scale, it's been found that neonectinoids have been used on plants that wind up in our gardens. And we can have the best intentions, but if we don't verify that they haven't been treated, those pesticides end up in those gardens anyways. So if you're shopping, let's say at big box stores, and you don't see signage that says no pesticides have been used, and you can't get a positive answer out of an employee, I recommend walking away from those plants. I really do. So as I was researching a little more about neonectinoids for this video and how to make it relevant to us as gardeners, I found that quite a few articles kept citing a scientific study that purchased plants from big box stores. And out of the 71 plants that they were looking at, over 35 had residues for neonectinoids, the extremely harmful and deadly pesticide. So if you're looking to shop for plants, we have to make sure those plants that we're bringing home have not been treated already. And if you're unsure, if you can't tell or no one's giving you an answer, walk away from those plants. Please, just walk away. Put them down. I know it's hard. I know we get excited when we're picking up plants and we really want to bring them home. Put them down. Walk away. So how can you buy plants more safely, right? Well, if you're looking for specific wildflowers, for instance, you're already aiming for host plants, plants for our specialist bees, you kind of already know what you want, and you're going native, look up native plant nursery near me or native plant sales near me. Now, sometimes you'll find plant sales being hosted by nature centers, sometimes conservation districts will sell them out of their offices. You can also sometimes find native plant sales by various plant clubs. If you look hard enough, you'll find one or two in your area. Now, if you're not fortunate enough to have a native plant sale happening in your area, check for native plant nurseries. These are going to be much more large-scale plant operations that can offer you a variety of species, and sometimes they often have vegetable starts as well. Now, native plant nurseries are usually run by people with a passion for pollinators and are typically committed to avoiding pesticide use. You still want to verify before you bring any plants into your garden, but your odds of being able to source them safely at a native plant nursery are much higher than at big box stores. So since I'm down here in Ohio, a couple examples of native plant nurseries that I know of. There's Deeply Rooted Landscapes, and closer to me there is Companion Plants, and these are places where you can get native plant starts so you can strategically put them in your garden. Now for my Michigander friends and family, you can get plants from Barson's Greenhouse. That's where I got a lot of the plants for my mom's garden, and if you look at the pictures here, I think it turned out wonderful. And Barson's has it set up really cool where they've got all this signage for host plant of blank, and they've got the butterflies or moths that those are host plants for. So if you go in and you don't even do any research, you can figure it out by looking at their signage, and you can bring home native host plants and put them in your garden. So Barson's was awesome, and another nursery that I've grown to have a great relationship with is Designs by Nature. I think they're located closer to Lansing, but they have an awesome team, and they even ship garden kits to you. So a lot of nurseries will offer kits. Now these are going to be a variety of plants that they've already picked out that will be offering host plants and nectar and pollen, and will be amazing for your pollinators. And they've picked them out, put it together. All you have to do is say, I want a kit, please, thank you. You don't have to put in a whole lot more research. You can still, get odds and ends plants, request other ones that you really have a particular inkling, and you want to include them in your garden. You can do that. But these kits make it super easy if you don't feel like doing that. And a lot of them right now have been shipping, especially since COVID has made it harder for us to get out. Get them shipped to your house. Then you really don't have to do anything. You don't have to go out and do the shopping, which I know we probably all really love to go out and do the shopping. But especially if you don't have a nursery directly in your community, having them shipped is a really great option. Now, if you're a gardener who prefers to start everything by seeds, you can order seeds for native wildflowers. Some companies that you can get native wildflower seeds from are Prairie Moon Nursery, and you can get them in individual packets. You can also order from Pheasants Forever. They're a big player in the conservation game, and they offer seed mixes and seeds by state, so you're getting regionally native varieties. Now down here in Ohio, we have a seed company called Ohio Prairie Nursery. For my Michigan friends, there's Michigan Wildflower Farm. These are local companies that you can support that will also be supporting your local economy, and your impact gets smaller the closer the businesses that you're ordering and purchasing from are to you. And that also, in the long term, has a positive impact on pollinators and wildlife as a whole. Awesome, right? After your garden has some time to establish itself, you can even collect seeds from your garden. Now there are different collection methods per species, so you're going to want to be familiar with what you're growing and how best to collect those seeds and when to collect them. There are also storage requirements and certain processing you have to do, for instance, cold stratification time, and that differs per species. I had a lot of fun volunteering with Project Wingspan and getting trained on seed collection methods. We met up at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service office in Lansing, Michigan for my training, and it was so cool. But essentially what they taught us was how to identify the target species in bloom, how to identify them after they've gone to seed, because they're not going to look the same anymore, and then how to collect them based on the different species and the way that their seeds behave and how to store them. Volunteering with Project Wingspan not only allowed me to get my boots dirty and get hands-on experience with native plants and seed collection, it also really improved my personal knowledge. So I highly recommend if you can volunteer with Project Wingspan or other agencies that are doing similar work, it would really improve on your practice and your knowledge, and everyone loves a volunteer. So even if you don't come standard with all of this plant ID knowledge and being familiar with seeds, everyone loves people who are willing to contribute their time and energy, and somebody will be willing and excited to teach you. So I highly recommend getting involved wherever you can. If there's like community gardens in your area, especially native plant community gardens or butterfly gardens, if you will, get involved, because there's always going to be another gardener excited to run around the garden with you and teach you plants and show you how to collect seeds and show you how to plant things. And getting involved and getting hands-on experience with plants, even just as a gardener for your own knowledge, it does so much. It really does. And I would love to take every single one of you outside to go run through a field and ID wildflowers. I would love to sit on my porch with you and show you the different pollinators hiding around my garden. But right now, we're going to have to suffice with you hanging out with me on the screen and getting volunteer experience and learning in person, in your own ways. So thank you so much for joining me. I am so ecstatic to have you guys taking the time to learn about pollinators with me, because we need to be acting, and we need to be acting fast. If we want to curb the decline in bees, we really need to do our part as gardeners and grow as much pollinator habitat as we can. The bees, butterflies, moths, and everybody else, quite frankly, are depending on us to do our part until we can get large-scale policy changes, in the industries that are also causing a lot of pain. We've got to do what we can while we also push for change in these other industries. And the first thing we can do is to grow native wildflowers. Honestly. If that's not the easiest thing we can do, because, you stick it in the ground and it grows. Fighting policy change is a little harder. So let's do what we can while we can. Still push for change, supporting local community businesses like nurseries that don't use pesticides, supporting smaller seed companies. That also pushes for change. That shows the people who are treating their plants that we're not going to buy them. And that sends a message too. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for being excited about pollinators. And I wish you happy gardening.